Paul Skenes get his first home win since April, and the guys who drove in his 3 runs of support are guys who will be here next year. That's the best kind of win this team can have in 2025, and that's next on Locked On Pirates.
You are Locked On Pirates, your daily Pittsburgh Pirates podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Pirates. I'm Gary Morgan. Good stuff last night, right? Paul shoved for 6 innings, and the Bats did enough to hand a protectable lead to the bullpen. Spencer Horwitz had 3 hits and drove in a run. Brian Reynolds drove in another 2. Again, these are 2 guys who will be back in 2026. And the pitcher they helped secure a win for, well, he will be too. I say that because while I'd take a win of 3-0 anytime, it means a lot more that these 2 guys contributed. Say it was a but it's a base hit that has him pass Willie Stargell on the all-time MLB hits list. And his next hit will tie him with Mike Schmidt. I mean, if you're not starting to kind of take some of the historical marks that Kutch is creeping up on seriously, well, maybe start actually looking into what he's doing. There's, you're getting into the territory where like 170 some players have done something that Kutch hasn't. I mean, it's pretty interesting. And then Johan Oviedo, early reports yesterday that he had a locker at PNC Park, and a lot of people took that as a call up because recently that's kind of how we've been getting call up news. You get a tweet or somebody puts it on Facebook or whatever. I guess if they're trying to reach people in a nursing home. They'll put up, hey, so-and-so has a locker at PNC Park, and then the world just runs off with it like that's the actual story. Well, this is one of those rare occasions where him having a locker didn't have anything to do with getting called up. It was about having a scheduled bullpen in front of the doctors and everything here at PNC Park. He's still with the Altoona Curve. I believe he'll go back to the Altoona Curve. He was around the team last night, and you could tell it made him feel good. He was on the top railing, I think, just about all 9 innings of that game, rooting on his teammates. I even saw him jump over the fencing a couple times, like just to retrieve balls. The guy's so hungry to get back out there. Good stuff. I'm not sure what they're going to do with Johan Oviedo quite yet. I heard Don Kelly said that they plan on trying to still stretch him out into a starter, but we're already almost in August. And so to me, I feel like you might be wasting an asset here. He's waited a long time to get back on the field, and I think you might be better served just in a pinch here to go ahead and start him out in the bullpen this year and let it play from there. It's not as though it's an unfamiliar place for him to be. And I would think, like, even if you do get him stretched out, you're talking about a guy who, like, by September is probably reaching 5 innings, maybe 6. And I think you've got maybe a couple of those before you start talking about the scheduled shutdown that comes with Tommy John. After you've had a few stretch out moments, they tend to like to take that away from you a bit. So I think we're probably looking at a bullpen deployment. If you ask me, that would probably be the best use of Johan Oviedo. Plus, I think there's some other starters that they really got to get their eyes on. I mean, of course, a lot of this depends on how much they move. Let's say that they do move like Bailey Falter, Andrew Heaney, and Mitch Keller. Well, okay, all bets are off. You might go with Johan Oviedo as a starter, even if you've got to piggyback him and whatnot. Hell, we might see Braxton Ashcraft as a starter if that's the case. But you got to make room. Bubba Chandler, he stubbed his toe again in his last one. Okay, I think what's becoming pretty clear about Bubba Chandler is that Bubba's got some work to do on the consistency side of things. Okay. The stuff is otherworldly. The control, when he's really, really going well, it can be really, really good. When it's not really, really going well, he can really be pretty bad. So I think there's definitely some downside there that they need to continue to try to bevel out. But I also think, hey, he's the most talented pitcher you have in the system that's not already up here. You got to start kicking the training wheels on him this year. And I think that's going to happen. So I don't believe that they should force Johan Oviedo into that situation. I'd rather see one of the youngsters and let's let him work back slowly in the bullpen. Rest of the night, though, aside from those 3 runs, because really what happened is the Pirates scored those 3 runs and then kind of sat on them. They didn't add on. They really didn't threaten to add on a whole lot. Left 8 guys on base. Runners in scoring position, still a problem for this team. Paul Skenes was brilliant. The other thing that people were talking about was why did he get pulled out after the 6th inning? And I think he only had 80-some pitches. I think it was 86. So did he have another inning in there? Yeah, probably. He probably does have another inning in there if he wants it, if the team wants it. But I didn't have a problem with pulling him out. I really didn't. It's been a while since they've allowed him to kind of push himself. I think it's been 3 weeks, actually. So to let him go 6 innings was cool. I think he could have gone 7. He had his pitch count under control. I don't think it's about not being able to. I just think when you get into a situation like that, very good chance that the player and the coach have kind of talked about the situation and they've decided, yeah, it's best to just call it a day right now. It was good. Let's have a fresh, clean inning from somebody to come out there and see what they can do. I think that's kind of a conversation that happens an awful lot with Paul. I mean, he doesn't seem like the guy that needs to push himself all that much. I don't think this is a guy that's begging to get out of games, but I also don't think he fights about it when the time has come. And I think for him, the time had come. 6 up and downs, did a great job against a really tough lineup. Let's turn it over to a fresh arm and see what can happen and see if you can take that 3-run lead home. And they did. I was a little surprised to see that they trusted Braxton Ashcraft with that 7th inning. He's a young guy. I want them to do that. Again, I think for the purposes of 2026, I'd love to see leverage situations for guys like this. That's exactly what you should be doing. That seems like a good usage of your time. So I was happy to see it, but I was still a little bit surprised by it. Now, a lot of that could be like the blow up that like Caleb Ferguson had the other day. That could be an issue. Maybe they're trying to just back off of him for a minute. They've been really using the hell out of Isaac Mattson. Maybe they felt he needed a break. But Braxton Ashcraft did great. Maybe that's something we need to see a little bit more from him. This long man in the bullpen thing they've been doing with Braxton Ashcraft, I think it's kind of getting old. Only seeing him once every like 4 or 5 days. I think he's showing that if they wanted to deploy him in that manner, they could probably go ahead and use him as a straight bullpen guy, just like they did last night. And you'd see Braxton pitch 3-4 times a week. And I think he could really contribute to this bullpen. As it stands right now, most of the time he's just a warm body that has no hope of getting into the game. So I think it's something that they need to look at here moving forward. I understand wanting to kind of hold him to the starter mentality and try to keep him in multiple inning situations and whatnot. But I think it's creating at least the feeling that you have a short bullpen, even though you don't. And I think it's wasting a kid. I think it's wasting a kid that could be contributing. I don't think like you're defining his career by having him act like a bullpen arm while he's here. So, I mean, to me, that's a little bit here nor there. I think they could probably use Braxton in a different way. Santana and Bednar closed it out. I can't think of 2 more attractive trade pieces out there from the Pirates bullpen than David Bednar and Dennis Santana. They've both been just so good. Ever since Bednar came back from AAA, and Dennis Santana, really ever since his first outing as a Pittsburgh Pirate, has been incredible. So those two in particular should get a lot of interest. And speaking of interest, in the next segment, I'm going to talk about the latest rumors that I've heard and substantiate what I can and dispel what I can. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're all about baseball under the lights, golf on the green, or high stakes soccer action, FanDuel is the best way to make every game even more exciting. You're already following the action. Why not make it a little more thrilling with FanDuel? You can get in on the game while your friends are getting sunburned at the beach. Whether I'm placing a same game parlay or watching a bet ride into the ninth inning, FanDuel makes it feel like I'm part of the action. I just never bet on the Pirates. New to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Hey, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. Hey, hit me with a subscribe and a like down there. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys. The audience has just been blowing up the last few episodes. I can't thank you enough, honestly, because the team just does not perform like a team that should be helping a guy talking about them grow. And you guys are making it happen. So I appreciate it. Let's talk a little bit about rumors that are going on, swirling around right now. You've probably heard some I won't mention. I'm only going to mention ones that I think are clearly ones we can wipe off the table or ones that I think we have legs. Okay. So let's start with Ke'Bryan Hayes. And let's start with his competition, really. I think you're going to see other guys available to play third base. Ahmad Rosario is having a decent season, and he's kind of a low risk, low impact pickup that I think is going to be available for a lot of teams. And you don't have to worry about him beyond this year. He's just going to try to help you this year. You don't get the glove that Hayes provides, obviously, but you get a much more potent bat. Eugenio Suarez. Oh, that dude is going to be somebody's crown jewel this trade deadline. He's having that season that he has every so often where he goes off and hits 50 home runs. He's a good defender. He is on the last year of his deal with Arizona. He's hitting a ton of home runs. He's on a heater. We've seen him do this before with Cincinnati. And, you know, we know what it looks like when he gets on one. He's really hard to get out. He's still going to strike out a ton. That's what he does. But he's probably going to hit 50 home runs this year. And I could see that being the envy of a whole lot of big playoff teams. So I don't necessarily think that he's in the same stratosphere as a Ke'Bryan Hayes, but I do think Ke'Bryan Hayes is an option if you're going to kind of fall down the priority list. Well, here's why I think that's a little funny. I think Ahmad Rosario and Suarez go to two of these deadline participants. And by the time that happens, then you're talking about Ke'Bryan Hayes with a whole lot of term and a team that expects to be paid for that term. And I think the price tag for Suarez is probably going to be the highest by far. It's going to be more than I think the Pirates could get for Ke'Bryan Hayes. But it's going to look a lot more like what the Pirates want for Ke'Bryan Hayes, if you get what I mean. He's not a guy that they can just dump for nothing. I know that's what you'd like to hear, or you think, you know, when you're a couple beers deep at the bar. But this isn't a guy that you just cut. And this isn't a guy they can just trade for nothing. Because they're not just going to straight up improve at third base. They're going to The defense is very real. The defensive runs saved are very real. That stuff's all true. Saving runs is important too. There are teams that will be interested. The Yankees are one of those teams. Now, the Yankees are interested in Brian Hayes, I understand, mostly because they do kind of want to solve this problem for a few years. They have had a hard time fielding a third baseman for a while, and they have enough offense elsewhere in their lineup where you can get away with having a guy like Brian Hayes. So that has some legs, if you ask me. I think that rumor probably has more legs than most of the rumors that I've heard out there. I think they have the prospect depth to do it. I think if you really, really want the truth, I think the Pirates would do better if they tried to package someone in with him, like a David Bednar. I think you answer 2 questions for the Yankees and maybe you get a better package back. But Pirates have third base options. They may not be great, but I think like you at least would clear up some space for like a Nick York to come up here, maybe a Billy Cook. And you start working on filling third base for next year, hopefully with a little bit more offense. And I think you just got to go ahead and admit and accept you're going to lose defense because just isn't going to be a fielder like him unless God reaches down and touches Jared Triolo and turns him into a hitter. Because that's the only way that you're truly going to improve this internally quickly. They have some options where I think you can improve the offense quickly, but total package wise, it's still going to be a tough sell. Brian Hayes did not turn into the player we hoped he would, but that doesn't mean that he didn't turn into a player. He's still a valuable baseball player, believe it or not. And you'll see that one day after he's been traded. You will. You'll look back and understand what you had, and you'll understand what that other team got to. Plus, I actually think he'll probably perform better if the stress of trying to be one of the stars is off of his back. And I think if there's more traffic on the bases, he hits with traffic on the bases. And I think if you get to a team that produces a hell of a lot more of that, I think you get a better Brian Hayes. The other team that I've heard him rumored to is the Cubs. Now, I heard the Cubs are really kind of like last resort with Brian Hayes. Like he's not their number one target, but I think they've mentioned him as far as somebody they wouldn't mind adding to this team as far as an upgrade at third base goes. Again, I think their top would probably be Suarez. I think most teams will probably go for Suarez and try to make that a reality because that's the most impact bat that I think is available at this deadline. So I just think that's going to be a hot commodity. And I think because of that, I think Hayes is just going to keep tumbling down people's boards. And if there's going to be a deal for Hayes, it's going to be a very last minute one. And the thing about that makes it hard to believe is you're not going to get a last minute deal for a guy that you're expecting like a decent package back for. It's going to take a little bit of creativity on both sides to figure it out. He is owed some term. He hasn't been great. He's a good fielder, but he's not a difference maker offensively. So you got to decide, I don't need help offensively. I need help defensively, right? And you got to be okay with paying him, and you got to be okay with having him around for the next few years or turning around and flipping him yourself, I suppose. But there's a little bit more there. And then the team that's selling him is obviously going to expect a little bit more than like just a rental here and there or a lottery ticket towards the bottom of the league. You're going to want something a little bit closer, right? You're going to want something a little bit more top 10 prospect type package. You want a couple of those maybe for Brian Hayes. He's still a valuable commodity. That's 2 rumors about Brian Hayes. Mitch Keller is picking up steam. I've heard now the Mets. I've heard the Cubs. I've heard the Red Sox. I've heard the Yankees. I've heard Tampa, believe it or not, because the Tampa rumor, I just don't believe it. First of all, they're kind of going through that whole like ownership shakeup, so I'm not 100% sure they have their identity or path set up yet. And second, that's a lot of term for Tampa to onboard. They typically don't do that. They go the other direction. I feel like that Tampa one's bunk. But hey, who knows? Maybe they'll do something a little bit different. They are hanging in a race that I don't think anybody saw them hanging in. Also, doesn't seem like their biggest problem would be to get another starting pitcher. And I'm not sure he fits their mold. He's a guy that goes later into games, and Tampa doesn't do that with hardly anybody. So if you're not going to let Mitch eat innings, he's probably less valuable than he is for a team that is going to allow him to give him that 6 or 7 innings every time he goes out there. So I just, to me, the Tampa is just a weird fit. I don't see that. The Cubs, I don't see the Pirates doing that. I don't think the Cubs have the package that they would be willing to part with. You'd want their number 1 overall prospect for sure. And I don't think he's available to anyone. And their number 2 prospect, I've got questions about the strikeout numbers with Alcantara. So those 2 in particular, they're interesting prospects. Again, man, you're trading like a locked on for sure member of your rotation. I don't know that I want somebody that can't make a team right now. I just don't. I don't know that I want somebody that is not ready to be a major league contributor right this second. Get what I mean? So that's something to think about. And also, I don't want to give somebody that I know is going to kill me for 4 years to the Cubs. I'm sorry. Them not having pitching is like the only thing that we've ever had as far as like beating the Cubs. And they've done a lot to correct that on their own with drafting and developing and international signings, but I'm not helping them. Okay. I think there's other more attractive package options out there. The Red Sox remain the most interesting to me. I think if you moved Mitch Keller to the Red Sox, I think you could address your outfield situation. I believe they have it narrowed down to either Duran or Abreu as being the options that they might potentially have for sale. There could really be a marriage there. The Yankees, I'm not sure. I've heard everything from Jason Dominguez to a bucket of prospects that I don't want. I haven't heard anything from a reputable New York source. I got to say that. I think and I don't mean like some of the guys that talk to the agents. I just mean like I have guys that I trust in New York. I haven't heard anything from them about Mitch Keller. The Blue Jays have been interested. Again, I don't think they have the package to get this done. It would probably have to come back with like some MLB ready talent. I just don't believe they have that. And a lot of the package proposals that I've seen for Mitch Keller, they're all returning like a starting pitcher. If they're returning a starting pitcher, they haven't even bothered to investigate this team. Okay. So you want to talk about like what's real and what isn't. If your proposed package back for Mitch Keller has a starting pitcher prospect, I would just invite you to like understand that person does not know what they're talking about, because that would not be what the Pittsburgh Pirates are looking for Mitch Keller. The only reason they're comfortable moving him is because they've got a boatload of prospects. Those 2 are the most popular that I can think of. David Bednar, I heard a little bit of murmuring about the New York Mets, but I don't know if that's going to happen. Philadelphia is interesting for Bednar, but I haven't heard a direct tie there. It just makes too much sense to not mention it, but I have not heard any kind of viable rumor about that. In fact, I haven't heard David Bednar even talked about internally very much, which makes me feel like Bob has already put the kibosh on it potentially. So you could be looking at Dennis Santana being your biggest reliever sell, and that could go anywhere. Let's just be real. That could go anywhere for the best thing you could get. So, I mean, I think a lot of these guys are going to go. You're not going to hear rumors on guys like FAM and IKF. And what, that's just stuff's just going to happen. But those bigger players, yeah, I mean, the sweet spot really is to move them for a package of players that makes sense. The only one I see that really makes a lot of sense to me for Mitch Keller so far is Boston and maybe the Mets. The Mets have, I think Mauricio is a shortstop in the making that they could give you. And I think it's overflow for them, but young talent for you, and I think fairly proven out talent. So that would be the headline of the package. I'd want more, but that'd be the headline of the package. And maybe in a situation like that, you'd throw in a Bednar or a Santana and see if you can sweeten the deal and get even a better prospect package back. They've gotten sour on their starting catcher. Maybe there's a way to kind of finagle that in there too. We'll see. But there are deals to be made out there if they want to make them. That's the rumors I got right now. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit about a divided room. If you're running a business, you know that every missed call is money left on the table. Think about the last time you had a service emergency, like a burst pipe. If the first plumber didn't answer, did you wait? Nope. You called the next one. That's why having a reliable business line is so important, and that's why you need OpenPhone. OpenPhone is the #1 business phone system that helps you streamline and scale customer communication, all from an app on your phone or computer. Did you juggle 2 phones just to keep your business and personal calls separate? OpenPhone solves that instantly. OpenPhone is offering Locked On Pirates listeners 20% off your first 6 months at openphone.com/lockedonmlb. That's openphone.com/lockedonmlb. And if you have existing numbers with another service, OpenPhone will port them over at no extra charge. OpenPhone, no missed calls, no missed customers. All right, welcome back to Locked On Pirates. We're going to talk a little bit about a divided room, and what I mean by that is not what you're thinking. I don't mean they're fighting. I mean like they have a situation where they've got a lot of leadership candidates, and they've got a lot of sects of players that don't necessarily look at those players for leadership. The unquestioned leader on this team is Paul Skenes, and that's where all the energy is. That's where the youth movement is. That's where the guys that still believe they can win a championship here reside. That's where I think most of the eyes of the nation look at. They look at Paul Skenes as the leader of the Pirates. And I think in that room, it's hard for the rest of the guys not to look at him like that. That said, if you're like a 38-year-old man or a 34-year-old man or whatever, you may not want to listen to a 23-year-old, okay? Like, I know that most of you have jobs where you have started working with some kid that just came out of college and he's using all these terms that he just learned and running around telling you all these new methods that you haven't learned yet. And it makes you feel like he thinks you're old. He thinks you're stupid. Then a couple weeks go by and then that person tends to see why you don't do things a certain way or why you don't use certain terms, right? And it all kind of works out. Well, these rooms are the same thing. And I just think it's something interesting that's going on because they don't have a coach that's going to lead like the room. I don't believe Don Kelly is any more that type of coach than Derek Shelton was. That doesn't mean they don't like him or anything. It just means he's not a guy that believes he needs to go in the room and lead. Okay. He leaves it up to the room. And that's an old Jim Leland thing too. I know you remember him yelling and everything, but those were rare moments where he would freak out in the room and yell in front of everybody. I have heard Don has done that a couple times, especially after lackluster performances, but I don't think that translates to like the leadership of the team. You'd love it to be the guys that the Pirates have inked, like Brian Reynolds or Brian Hayes or even Mitch Keller, but they're all quiet. They're all quiet in nature. They're all quiet in spirit. They don't get animated. They don't really want to lead by anything but example. And, that doesn't work in a room to like shake things up. Paul doesn't feel like comfortable coming out and telling the room how it is yet. Andrew McCutcheon's here, and he's older, and he remembers the good old days here in Pittsburgh. But most of the guys in that room, they don't want to hear about the good old days anymore. Because, by the way, the good old days didn't win. They didn't actually get there, you know? And it's not that they don't respect Andrew McCutcheon. It's just, okay, but this isn't even the same management team anymore. You know? Like, if Kutch is telling them stories of like when he and others went to management back in 2013 to get them to do something, well, I'm sure that everyone enjoys those stories, but go and do it then, Kutch, if you've got that kind of power. You know what I mean? So I just think like there's a little bit of a divide in that room. Winning solves a lot of this. You know, you start to win, and I think all of a sudden your room is healthy again, right? But a lot of these rentals, they're veterans that knew from the moment they signed they were not going to be here for the entirety of 2025. The thing is, everybody in that room knew it, and that's the way they get looked at. And that's why when you bring in leadership in the form of veterans and you bring them in on these 1-year deals, which is kind of my larger point. When you bring in these guys on 1-year deals, you can't expect them to bring all the intangibles that you would get if it was a guy that was like actually, you know, substantially marrying this team for a year or two, right? If it's a guy that knows he's going to be out the door again in July, well, he's not going to put as much into your team and investing in like mentorship and, you know, talking guys off the ledge, steering things back on a path, doing, you know, why would he do all that? First, it's not going to be received because they all know he's going to be gone in July. It's a waste of effort on his part because nobody wants to hear it. And also, he probably doesn't have anything to pass on. Andrew McCutcheon has some great stories to tell, and he's got some great experiences here in Pittsburgh, and he can talk about what the city is like and how it'll embrace you if you do X, Y, and Z and do this and that better. But none of that applies to this team. And I just think they don't have a natural leader in that room. They do. It's Paul. But I think they're going to have to move on from a little bit more of this veteran presence, and they're going to have to start letting their own veterans start act as that. I don't think you're ever going to get to the point where Brian Reynolds is screaming and yelling in a room and correcting people. You're never going to get that out of Mitch Keller either. But by default, they'll still be the older statesmen, and people will look to them and people will talk to them if they're the older statesmen. If you continue to go out and sign 34, 35, 36-year-olds as your veterans to come in and influence this room, like Adam Frazier and Tommy Pham, and as we've seen, Carlos Santana throughout the years, well, I think you're going to continue to have, at best, a hint of veteran leadership. I think, above all, that's why it's important that this team start to embrace multiple year signings of veteran free agents, because you get them vested in the team and you actually get more out of them, more of the intangibles that you hope you're getting if you actually extend them for multiple years. I think when you do this 1-year thing here and there, and then you've got all these other guys developing in different stages, think about it. You got the young guys like Paul Skenes and Jared Jones and Henry Davis and all that. They came up in this system believing that they were the great hope. They were the hope that was actually going to turn this thing around. Then you got your top guys like Andrew McCutcheon and Joey Bard, I'll say, and Andrew Heaney and Tommy Pham and those types. Well, Kutch has incentive because of his relationship with Pittsburgh. But everybody else, again, they knew they were leaving. And they knew that all they had to do is survive this mess for a few months. I'm sure they tried to be nice, and I'm sure they tried to pass on some tips and tricks and everything. That's different than leading a team. And then the middle ground guys, like I talked about, Keller, Reynolds, all those guys that are signed, O'Neal Cruz, they've been bathed in the stink of this team. They've seen nothing but losing. They all came along too late to taste any of the last time the team won, and they're all too early, arguably, to really enjoy the future with Paul Skenes and everything for more than a couple years. I don't know what you expect them to lead, besides telling you how crappy it was, right? Boy, it sure has gotten better. But it's pretty clear evidence that they themselves didn't make it better. So what are they leading? You create a fractured room, I think, by never, ever committing to guys for more than a year or two. And I just think you need to start doing that a little bit more if you want to clean this leadership aspect up, or get yourself a flamethrower of a coach. Got to do one or the other. You can't just expect leadership to manifest when you don't set up the situation. And that's all I got for you today. Let's hope that the Pirates can continue beating Detroit while Detroit is down. They've really struggled recently, and we're going to miss Trick Scooble, so that's good. Let's see if the Pirates and Mitch Keller can get another victory tonight. Let's go Bucks.